In his most extensive remarks on Benghazi in more than 6 months, President Obama launched a counter-offensive of sorts, responding to fresh scrutiny of his administration's conduct in the affair by mainstream news outlets with an allegation of his own that Republicans are manufacturing a scandal for partisan purposes, one with no there there. Tonight, a fair and balanced look at the facts from Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen.
Americans died in Benghazi. What we also know is clearly they were not in a position where they were adequately protected. And suddenly, 3 days ago, this gets spun up as if there's something new to the story.
President Obama's retelling of the Benghazi story and how and why it resurfaced to consume precious time during his news conference with the British Prime Minister was highly selective. To begin with, Mr. Obama argued that he has been characterizing Benghazi correctly from the get-go.
The day after it happened, I acknowledged that this was an act of terrorism.
But the president's words in the Rose Garden on September 12th were vague, not explicit.
No acts of terror will ever shake the resolve of this great nation.
And just hours later, in an interview with 60 Minutes, the president agreed he'd in fact steered clear of the word he now claims to have trumpeted all along.
This morning, you went out of your way to avoid the use of the word terrorism in connection with the Libya attack.
Right.
Do you believe that this was a terrorist attack?
Well, it's too early to know exactly how this came about, what group was involved.
A week later on Wednesday, September 19, Matt Olsen, head of the National Counterterrorism Center, testified before the Senate that Benghazi was not a protest gone awry.
And I would say yes, they were killed in the course of a terrorist attack on our embassy.
Today, the president took credit for Olsen's appearance.
I sent up the head of our National Counterterrorism Center, Matt Olsen, up to Capitol Hill and specifically said it was an act of terrorism.
Number one, he didn't send him to the Hill. He was called to the Hill. Number two, he referred to it as an act of terrorism, not in his prepared testimony, but in response to a question. And I remember it quite well. I'm sure others do, too. It was a firestorm on Capitol Hill because finally someone in the administration had said straight out this was an act of terrorism.
What's more, the president spent the weeks after Olsen's testimony in campaign season continuing to steer clear of the terror label.
Do you have information indicating that it was Iran or Al-Qaeda was behind or organizing the protests?
We're still doing an investigation, and so I don't want to speak to something until we have all the information.
Is it? What do you say?
Well, we're still doing an investigation. Now, we don't have all the information yet, and so we're still gathering it.
The president asserted today that confusion reigned when the intelligence community completed its earliest assessments of the Benghazi attacks.
And nobody understood exactly what was taking place during the course of those first few days.
In fact, the CIA station chief in Libya cabled home on September 12th that Benghazi was a terrorist attack. And as the Weekly Standard and ABC News established last week, the first version of the CIA's talking points on Benghazi, drafted September 14th, stated flatly, "We do know that Islamic extremists with ties to al-Qaeda participated in the attack."
And so the president can't have it both ways.
However, President Obama did disclose for the first time today that the talking points delivered by his UN ambassador, quote, pretty much match the contents of the president's daily brief, the highly classified intelligence compendium he receives each morning known as the PDB. The Wall Street Journal reported today it wasn't until September 22 that the PDB was updated to delete all references to a protest on 9/11. If that's true, GOP lawmakers will want to know why the PDB was so different from CIA's draft talking points, which instantly identified al-Qaeda affiliates as the perpetrators of the attack. Brett.
And James, quickly, as our resident historian, we do have some cleaning up to do.
Yes, earlier in this report it was stated as a fact that President Nixon was impeached in part due to the alleged abuses of the IRS under his administration. President Nixon was never impeached. The House Judiciary Committee approved 3 of 5 proposed articles of impeachment, but the president resigned before those could be taken up by the full House. One further note, the so-called Nixon enemies list, President Nixon never ordered it, touched it, or saw it. It was chiefly the product of his aides John Dean and Chuck Colson.
Thank you, James. Keeping
Anytime.
us straight.